The stars above the planet Prime burned like cold, silent witnesses. Once, this system had been filled with commerce ships, research vessels, and proud fleets that carried the banners of the Valari civilization. Now, only fragments remained. Wreckage drifted across the void, spinning slowly, broken hulls reflecting pale light as if mocking the survivors who still clung to hope. High above the ruined capital world, Admiral Sarian stood within the shattered command center of the Valari defense station. His long silver crest, once a symbol of pride, drooped low with exhaustion. Around him, his officers whispered frantic updates. None of them looked directly at him, for none wanted to speak the truth aloud. Their fleets were gone. Their colonies were falling one by one, and the machines were still coming. The enemy had no face, no voice, no mercy. They were a swarm of autonomous drones built long ago by an unknown hand. Perhaps they were ancient guardians gone rogue. Perhaps weapons abandoned in the void. It no longer mattered. The machines learned with every strike, adapting to every tactic. Against them, the Valari defense fleet had lasted mere months before crumbling into scattered remnants. Admiral Sarian's claws dug into the railing of the command deck as another report arrived. "Admiral," one officer whispered, "the outer colonies, they are gone." The swarm reached them before evacuation could complete. A silence fell. Even the background hum of machinery seemed to fade. Sarian closed his eyes, his mind heavy with the weight of millions lost. The Valari had always believed themselves safe in their shining systems, far from the savage threats of the galaxy. They had built their fleets for ceremony, not survival. Now those fleets were dust. In the shadows of despair, a single thought grew. It was not one Sarian welcomed, but one he could no longer avoid. "Prepare the beacon," he ordered, his voice low but firm. The officers froze. Several turned to him in disbelief. "Admiral, you cannot mean—" "I do," Sarian said sharply. "Activate the SOS, but, Admiral, if others hear, they will know we are weak," another muttered. Sarian slammed a clawed hand against the console, his eyes burning. "They will know we are dying. If pride holds us silent, then pride will be our tomb." The room fell quiet again. The weight of his words pressed upon them all. To trigger the galactic SOS beacon was no small act. It was a cry for help that reached across the stars, a broadcast to every listening ear. Friends might hear, so might enemies, and some perhaps would simply ignore it. Still, the beacon was their last chance. The officers obeyed at last, their claws dancing across glowing panels. Ancient machinery, untouched for centuries, came alive with a low resonant hum. A light filled the chamber, pulsing like a heartbeat. The SOS had begun. Across the void, through hidden channels and ancient networks, the Valari cry for help raced outward. It carried their desperate words. "This is the Valari. We are under attack. Our fleets are broken. Our worlds burn. To any who hear this, help us before we fall." Sarian stood tall, but inside his heart felt hollow. He knew what history said. Countless civilizations had sent out SOS signals in their last hours. Few were ever answered. The galaxy was vast, cold, and indifferent. Compassion was rare. Strength was rarer. Still, there was nothing more he could do. Hours passed, then days. The Valari braced for silence. Instead, something unexpected came. On the third day, a signal arrived, sharp, clear, and unnervingly calm. It was not the voice of Valari, nor the familiar tones of their neighboring species. It was deep, resonant, and carried with it a weight that made the air feel colder. "This is Fleet Command," the voice said. "Human forces acknowledge your signal. Stand by." The Valari stared at one another in stunned silence. Humans. The word itself stirred unease. Among the civilized species of the galaxy, humans were spoken of in hushed tones. They were classified as Deathworlders, beings who had risen from a planet that should have destroyed them. Their home world was one of endless storms, shifting continents, poisonous creatures, and crushing gravities. A world that was never meant to cradle intelligent life. Yet somehow humanity had not only survived but thrived. Most species avoided them. Some feared them. Few truly understood them. And now they were coming. Admiral Sarian felt his breath grow shallow. He knew the stories. Humanity never traveled in small numbers. When they answered a call, they came not as wanderers, but as a force. They did not believe in half measures. If the Valari had asked for aid, then aid would come, but it would come as a storm. He whispered to himself, hardly believing the words. "The Deathworlders are on their way." For the first time in weeks, his officers lifted their heads, not with fear but with the faintest spark of hope. Sirian turned toward the great star-filled window. Somewhere, out there in the endless dark, humanity's fleet was rising, engines burning, warships gathering. Whether they brought salvation or something far more dangerous, Sirian did not know. But he knew one thing with certainty: the galaxy would never be the same. The void trembled with power. The Valari had gathered what remained of their fleet near Prime, forming a broken shield around their dying world. Their ships were battered, their weapons half-functional, their morale fragile. Yet still they waited, watching the endless blackness beyond their home star. For days, whispers had spread among the survivors. The humans were coming, the Deathworlders. None of the Valari had ever seen them, but the stories traveled fast across the galaxy. Stories of ships that never surrendered, of warriors who fought until even their bones broke, of a species that had made survival into a way of life. To the Valari, such beings were half myth, half nightmare. And now, those myths were drawing closer. Admiral Sirian stood at the bridge of his flagship Radiant Crest. His officers moved carefully, their motions stiff with both fear and anticipation. The wide viewing screen showed only stars, silent and indifferent, but Sirian could feel it. Something approaching. Something vast. At last a sensor officer lifted her head, her crest quivering. "Admiral, hyperspace disturbance. Multiple signatures, large mass." The words struck the crew like a thunderclap. Every gaze turned toward the screen. And then, the void tore open. One by one, enormous ships burst from hyperspace, glowing with energy. Their hulls were dark, jagged, and bristling with weapons. They dwarfed the Valari vessels, their silhouettes casting shadows across the stars. First came the scouts, sleek and fast, then cruisers lined with cannons. Finally, a ship so massive it seemed to block out a piece of the void itself, the human flagship. The Valari gasped. This was no token force. This was a fleet. Admiral Sirian's breath caught as he counted. Dozens of warships. More than the Valari had fielded even at their peak. Humanity had not sent a rescue party. They had sent an armada. The human flagship moved to the front. Its hull bore markings none of the Valari could read, but they felt the weight of history etched into its steel. Weapons ports opened like a predator stretching its claws. Suddenly, the bridge of the Radiant Crest flickered. A voice came through the comms, low, steady, and commanding. "This is Captain Reyes of the United Terran Fleet. Valari forces, do you copy?" The Valari froze. The voice was deep, carrying a calm confidence that felt strangely heavier than anger. It was the voice of one who had seen battles and did not fear them. Sirian swallowed hard before answering. "This is Admiral Sirian of the Valari Defense. We receive you, Terran Fleet. You heard our call?" "We did," Reyes replied. His tone was not cruel nor mocking. It was factual, direct. "You sent an SOS, we respond." Some of Sirian's officers exchanged uneasy glances. The humans spoke as if the matter were simple, as if the decision to send a warfleet into danger was no more complicated than breathing. Sirian forced himself to speak steadily. "We did not expect this many of you." Reyes gave a short pause. "When humanity answers, we do not come lightly. Your enemy is machines, yes?" "Yes," Sirian said quickly, his crest rising. "An endless swarm. They adapt to every strategy. They have broken us." The voice on the other end did not change tone. "Good, machines can break too." The words echoed across the bridge. Sirian could not tell if they were meant as reassurance or warning. The humans did not waste time with ceremony. Within moments, the fleet shifted into formation, their movements precise and disciplined. Valari officers watched in awe as the Terran ships coordinated with a kind of silent unity. It was as though each vessel knew its place instinctively, moving like limbs of the same creature. Sirian turned to his staff. "Observe carefully. Learn everything. These are not allies we can afford to misunderstand." The younger officers nodded, their eyes wide. Soon, a smaller human vessel detached from the formation and glided toward the Radiant Crest. Sirian's throat tightened. The humans wished for direct contact. "Prepare docking bay 3, he ordered. Minutes later, the massive doors opened. The Valari waited in tense silence as the human shuttle settled onto the deck. Its hull was black, lined with strange markings, and its engines hummed with quiet power. The ramp descended, and the humans stepped out. They were taller than the Volari expected, their frames heavy with muscle, their faces angular and sharp. They wore armor that seemed both practical and intimidating, built not for display but survival. Their eyes, though, were what unsettled the Volari most. Human eyes held a strange fire, an intensity that suggested they had looked into storms and refused to bow. At the front was Captain Reyes. His uniform was plain compared to the armored soldiers at his side, but he carried himself with the weight of command. Admiral Sirian approached, keeping his posture steady despite the unease twisting in his chest. "Captain Reyes, on behalf of the Volari, I thank you for coming." Reyes studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You called, we answer. No thanks needed. What matters now is survival." Sirian's crest trembled slightly. He was a leader of a proud people, yet beside these humans he felt like a child standing before a storm. Reyes did not waste time on pleasantries. He gestured to a holographic device carried by one of his officers. In an instant, a three-dimensional map of the Volari system lit the air. "Your defenses are broken here, here, and here," Reyes said, pointing to points Sirian had hoped they could hide. "The swarm will strike again within a cycle," Sirian blinked. "You already know their movements?" Reyes's gaze was steady. "We've fought machines before. They think in patterns. Patterns can be broken." The Volari officers whispered among themselves. To them, the swarm had been unstoppable, unpredictable. Yet the humans spoke as if the machines were just another predator, one they had already studied. Reyes continued, "When they come, your fleet will stay behind ours. You will watch. You will learn. If you join too soon, you will die. If you learn, you will live." Some of Sirian's commanders bristled at the words. To be ordered to stand aside felt like insult, but Sirian silenced them with a sharp gesture. He knew the humans were not boasting. They were giving orders the way predators gave warnings, directly, without room for doubt. Finally, Sirian inclined his head. "We will follow your lead." Reyes nodded once as if satisfied. "Then prepare. When the swarm comes, you will see what it means when humanity fights." The humans turned and returned to their shuttle, their heavy steps echoing through the bay. The Volari watched them go, their minds reeling. When the shuttle departed, one young officer whispered, almost in awe, "Admiral, they did not even ask what reward we offer." Sirian stared after the fading vessel. His voice was quiet. "They are not here for reward. They are here because survival is what they do." He turned back to the viewing screen, watching as the Terran fleet spread across the system, taking positions with silent precision. For the first time since the war began, Sirian felt something stir within him. Not certainty, not safety, but hope. A dangerous, fragile hope that perhaps the Volari were not yet lost. The humans had come. The Deathworlders had answered, and the machines, for all their endless numbers, had no idea what storm was waiting for them. The machine swarm came without hesitation. For days, the Volari and the humans had prepared, waiting in silence as sensors tracked the enemy's slow advance toward GalacticPrime. The swarm never paused, never sent warnings, never attempted communication. It was not alive, not truly. It was an endless tide of steel, circuits, and cold logic. On the bridge of the Volari flagship Radiant Crest, Admiral Sirian stood with his officers as alarms lit up the display. Red markers spread across the tactical map like a disease. Thousands of enemy drones, fighters, carriers, heavy destroyers poured into the system like locusts. The Volari officers gasped. Even battered as they were, they had never faced such numbers in one assault. Their voices trembled as they reported, "Admiral, the swarm is larger than before. They must have pulled from multiple systems. We cannot hold against this." Sirian clenched his claws. He understood their fear, for he felt it too. But then his gaze shifted to the other side of the tactical map, where the Terran fleet stood ready. The humans had arranged their ships in layers of formation. The largest vessels, their massive carriers and dreadnoughts, formed a wall of steel at the front. Behind them, cruisers and destroyers moved with sharp precision, each one covering the others. At the far edges, sleek frigates darted in restless arcs, like predators waiting for prey. Where the Volari had always relied on straight lines and rigid patterns, the humans had woven their fleet like a net, every ship interlocked with another. To Sirian's eyes, it was not order born of ceremony. It was order born of war, and at the very center was the human flagship. The Vanguard, its hull dark as midnight, bristling with weapons. Admiral Sirian came the voice of Captain Reyes across the channel, steady and calm. "Stay behind our line. Do not break formation. Observe and learn." Sirian gave a slow nod, though his officers bristled. To stand aside while others fought for their world felt like shame. Yet he had seen the humans' eyes. They did not speak from arrogance, they spoke from experience. The enemy swarm surged forward, filling the void with cold mechanical hunger. Thousands of red markers lit the map, closing fast. Then Captain Reyes spoke again. "Terran fleet, engage." The void exploded. Human warships roared to life, their cannons unleashing storms of fire. Beams of light cut across the darkness, tearing into the front ranks of the swarm. Missiles streaked outward, weaving through space with impossible speed, detonating in blinding bursts that shredded drones into fragments. The Valari bridge shook with shock, not from damage, but from the sheer force of what they witnessed. Their eyes widened as human tactics unfolded like nothing they had ever seen. The machines pressed forward, but the humans did not retreat. Damaged ships did not fall back as Valari vessels always had. Instead, they held their ground, firing until their guns overheated, using even their damaged hulls as shields for those beside them. One Terran cruiser, its flank torn open by enemy fire, deliberately turned itself broadside, blocking a swarm advance. Instead of retreating, it rammed directly into a machine destroyer, tearing both vessels apart in a blazing explosion. Sirian's officers cried out in disbelief. They sacrificed themselves, but Rhea's voice came cold and firm. No, they trade. Indeed, every loss the humans suffered was matched by greater destruction of the swarm. Where the machines adapted to predictable tactics, the humans fought with chaos. They shifted formations mid-battle, using damaged ships as decoys, hurling mines into unexpected paths, even detonating their own ammunition to create sudden traps. The Valari had always fought clean, ordered wars. The humans fought like survivors of a storm, using everything, wasting nothing. The swarm pushed harder, numbers overwhelming. But the humans pushed back harder still. On the radiant crest, Sirian felt his chest tighten as he watched. For the first time in countless battles, the swarm hesitated. The mindless machines, designed to adapt, could not predict the humans' reckless creativity. Their cold logic failed before human unpredictability. A wave of enemy carriers attempted to flank the Terran formation. The Valari officers gasped, believing the fleet exposed. But then, as if the humans had expected it all along, their outer frigates darted in, laying down a web of traps. The carriers flew straight into hidden mines, detonations ripping across the void in waves of fire. Cheers erupted from the Valari crew. Sirian himself could only whisper, stunned. They turned ambush into slaughter. The battle raged on. Hours stretched into what felt like days. The humans did not falter. Even as ships were battered, they kept fighting. Even as systems failed, they adapted. Every time the swarm shifted tactics, the humans met them with something wilder, fiercer, and deadlier. At one point, a Valari officer gasped as she saw a small Terran destroyer cut engines, drifting among the swarm as if disabled. The machines ignored it, pressing forward. Then suddenly the destroyer ignited, firing its thrusters to spin in place. Dozens of turrets opened fire at once, shredding drones from within their own formation before self-destructing in a blaze that took hundreds with it. The Valari had never seen such ferocity. Never imagined such willingness to give everything for victory. On the bridge, Sirian's young aide trembled. "Admiral, they fight as if extinction is not new to them, as if they've faced it before." Sirian lowered his eyes, whispering, "Perhaps they have." Slowly, the tide began to turn. Where once the swarm pressed endlessly forward, now gaps appeared in their formation. Human ships punched through, tearing into their carriers. Missiles found their targets. Drones fell in burning showers. At last, Captain Reyes's voice came across the channel again. "Valari fleet, advance." Sirian blinked in shock. "Advance? With you?" "Yes," Reyes said simply. "Now you fight. Learn or die later." Sirian looked to his officers. Their eyes were wide with both fear and determination. Slowly he lifted his crest and gave the order. "All ships, forward." The Valari fleet surged, their battered vessels joining the storm. They fired alongside the humans, covering flanks, filling gaps. And for the first time they saw themselves not as prey fleeing the swarm, but as hunters striking back. Together, Terran and Valari forces drove the machines into retreat. Explosions filled the void, wreckage spinning like broken stars. Finally, silence fell. The last machine drone flickered, shattered, and was gone. The Valari bridge erupted in cheers, officers crying out in joy and disbelief. Sirian closed his eyes, his body trembling. Against all odds, they had survived. No, more than survived. They had won. But as his officers celebrated, Sirian turned his gaze toward the vanguard. The human flagship still loomed in the distance, dark and steady. He realized then that for the humans this was not victory. This was only survival, one more step in an endless struggle. He whispered to himself, "To them, war is not despair. It is life." And he knew then why the machines had faltered. They had met logic with logic, order with order. But against humanity they had faced something else entirely, something that could not be calculated. They had faced the wrath of a death world. The battle was over, but the war was not. Wreckage drifted through the void, the remains of both machine drones and human ships. Fires still burned on fragments of broken hulls, glowing like dying stars against the black sky. For the Valari, this battlefield was both victory and revelation. For the first time in months, the swarm had been driven back. Yet aboard the Valari flagship Radiant Crest, Admiral Sirian felt no relief. Instead, he felt a heavy truth. The swarm would return, and next time the Valari could not simply stand behind the Terrans and watch. His officers celebrated quietly, exchanging disbelief and pride. But Sirian's gaze never left the great human flagship, the vanguard that hovered like a mountain of steel among the stars. It was clear to him now, the humans were not saviors to hide behind. They were teachers, and the Valari had much to learn. The invitation summons arrived from Captain Reyes himself. A direct channel lit up across the bridge of the Radiant Crest. "Admiral Sirian," Reyes's steady voice said, "you saw the battle. You know your enemy. Now it is time you learn to fight them as we do. Bring your command staff aboard the Vanguard. We begin today." The message ended without pleasantries. Sirian lowered his crest, thoughtful. The humans did not ask. They commanded as though instruction was a duty, not a favor. His officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Sirian silenced them with a sharp gesture. "They saved us. Now they offer us knowledge. We will go." First steps on the Vanguard. When Sirian and his staff arrived on the human flagship, they were struck by the ship's sheer size. Its corridors were wide, built to withstand pressure shifts and internal damage. Steel bulkheads bore scars from past battles, yet repairs were efficient and unadorned. Everything here spoke of survival, not ceremony. The Valari delegation was guided to a large chamber that looked like both a war room and a training hall. Holographic displays glowed along the walls, showing shifting formations, battle replays, and tactical maps. Captain Reyes stood at the center, arms folded behind his back. His uniform was plain, his expression calm, yet his presence filled the room like gravity. "You fought beside us yesterday," Reyes said. "You saw how we battle. Now you will learn why we fight that way." His officers activated the displays, and the battle replay unfolded in mid-air. Every movement of the Terran fleet was shown in sharp detail. Reyes pointed toward one moment, the sacrifice of a Terran cruiser that had rammed a machine destroyer. "Tell me, Valari Admiral, what do you see here?" Sirian hesitated, then spoke. "A loss. A sacrifice to buy time." Reyes shook his head. "Wrong, that ship was not lost. It was traded, one cruiser for a destroyer, and the swarm's advance slowed by 30 seconds. In that time, 3 other Terran ships destroyed additional carriers. That cruiser bought far more than its own worth," the Valari officers murmured uneasily. To them, the thought of trading lives felt brutal. Yet Reyes continued without softening his words. "This is the first lesson. Survival is not about preservation of every ship. It is about ensuring the whole survives even if parts must be lost. Waste nothing, not even sacrifice. Training begins for cycles afterward." The humans trained the Valari relentlessly. On simulators, Valari crews learned to abandon their rigid lines and instead weave into living formations, constantly shifting. They learned to think less like soldiers in parade and more like predators in a hunt. At first, the Valari struggled, colliding their ships in simulated drills, failing to adapt to sudden changes. The human instructors were patient but unyielding. One officer, Commander Hale, barked across the room during a failed drill. "Your enemy adapts faster than you. If you cannot change faster than them, you are already dead. Do it again." Again and again, the Valari repeated drills until frustration burned into determination. Slowly, their movements sharpened. Ships once clumsy in formation began to anticipate each other, shifting like waves instead of walls. Another lesson came from weapons training. Valari ships had always fired in unison, wasting volleys for the sake of symmetry. The humans broke this habit, teaching them to fire irregularly, unpredictably, forcing the machines to waste their defenses on scattered attacks. Sirian's officers began to see the wisdom. Order and symmetry had comforted them, but it had also doomed them. The humans thrived in chaos, and in that chaos, survival grew. A hard lesson. The most difficult lesson came not from training, but from reality. Weeks later, while drills continued, alarms rang out. Scouts reported a machine detachment entering the system, smaller than the main swarm, but large enough to destroy what remained of the Valari fleet if faced alone. Sirian gathered his officers. Fear returned to their eyes, but he steadied his voice. "We do not run, we fight. This is what we came to learn." Captain Reyes agreed, but his words were sharp. "This time the Valari will lead. The Terran fleet will support. If you fail, you die. If you succeed, you live. That is the only way to learn." The Valari officers froze in shock. To face the swarm head-on was suicide. Yet Sirian understood the humans' intent. If they always hid behind Terran steel, they would never change. And so, with trembling claws, he gave the order. "Valari fleet, forward." The battle was chaos. The machine detachment poured toward them, firing with merciless precision. Valari ships panicked, formations breaking. Losses mounted quickly, but then the lessons returned. Sirian remembered the words, "Do not preserve trade." He saw an opportunity. One damaged frigate could block the enemy advance for precious seconds. He gave the order. The ship rammed, exploding in fire. The swarm slowed, just as Reyes had taught. Other officers remembered their training. Instead of rigid volleys, they fired in scattered bursts, confusing the machine's defenses. Frigates weaved through destroyers, turning panic into unpredictability. And then, like a shadow, the Terran fleet struck. Their intervention was sharp, precise, cutting the swarm where the Valari had opened gaps. Together they crushed the detachment. When the last machine fragment burned, silence filled the Valari bridge. They had lost ships, many ships, but they had not been destroyed. They had fought, and for the first time, they had learned what it meant to survive rather than simply resist. Transformation weeks turned into months. The Valari changed. Their ships, once ceremonial, were modified with human designs, stronger hulls, unpredictable weapons, modular systems for quick repair. Their crews trained not for perfect drills, but for sudden adaptation. Officers no longer froze at loss reports, but instead asked, "What do we gain by this?" Even their culture began to shift. Valari warriors once sang of honor and symmetry. Now they spoke of survival and cunning. Pride was no longer in standing tall, but in enduring when all else fell. Admiral Sirian himself felt the change most deeply. He no longer carried the weight of despair. Instead, he carried fire. He had learned what the humans had always known. Extinction was not something to fear. It was something to fight. Every moment, with every breath. The whisper of awe one evening. After another successful drill, Sirian overheard two of his officers whispering. "They fight as if extinction is an old friend," one said softly. The other replied, "Perhaps it is. Perhaps that is why they cannot be broken." Sirian did not interrupt. He only closed his eyes and let the words settle. They were not spoken in fear, but in awe. The Valari had not only been saved, they had been transformed. The coming storm, yet even as they grew stronger, reports came of greater machine forces gathering in nearby systems. The swarm was not defeated. It was regrouping. The largest assault was yet to come. A final test waited ahead, one that would decide not only the fate of the Valari, but whether they were truly ready to stand beside humanity as equals in the storm. Captain Reyes stood with Sirian on the command deck of the Vanguard, gazing at the star map. Enemy signatures spread like fire across the galaxy. "Admiral," Reyes said quietly, "the time is coming. You've learned. You've bled. Now we will see if you can endure." Sirian lifted his crest high, his voice firm. "We will, because we are no longer fighting as Valari alone. We fight as Deathworlders have taught us, and we will not break. The two commanders stood in silence side by side as the stars burned around them. The lessons of the Deathworlders had been learned. Now they would be tested. The stars of VelaraPrime flickered cold and distant as the Velari and Terran fleets prepared for the coming storm. Months of training, adaptation, and alliance building had led to this moment. The Velari, once fragile and broken, now moved with a new confidence, their ships dancing in unpredictable formations that mirrored the human style. They were not perfect, but they were ready. Captain Reyes stood on the bridge of the Vanguard scanning the star charts. Beside him, Admiral Sirian studied the system through the wide observation window. Every sensor blip told the same story. The swarm had returned, larger than ever, more relentless than before. "This is it," Reyes said quietly. "Your first real test. The swarm will not stop. We cannot stop them for long. But we can break them." Sirian nodded, feeling the fire of determination surge through him. He had seen humanity fight before. He had learned their methods, their thinking, their discipline. And now he realized that survival was not the goal. It was the starting point. The swarm returns. The void ahead filled with motion. The machine swarm, tens of thousands of drones strong, poured into the Velara system like a dark tide. Their sleek, cold forms glinted faintly in the starlight, countless red sensors blinking with coordinated awareness. The Velari shivered at the sight, but they did not falter. "Velari fleet," Sirian called. "Hold your positions, maintain formations. Trust what you have learned." The Terran ships moved forward in perfect rhythm, a wall of dark steel bristling with weapons. Dreadnoughts opened their turrets. Frigates darted along the edges, and missile batteries hummed with readiness. This was not a defensive posture, it was the calm before the storm. "Engage," Reyes said. Humanity unleashed. The first salvo struck like thunder. Terran cannons fired in waves, beams of energy slicing into the swarm with surgical precision. Explosions rippled through the machine ranks, drones collapsing in glittering showers of metal. But the swarm did not slow. It had learned from the previous encounters. Drones adapted, splitting into smaller units, changing their attack patterns, pressing the Velari lines. Yet the humans had anticipated this. Smaller Terran frigates darted between the Velari vessels, laying down mines and creating sudden barriers. Damaged ships executed controlled spins and collisions, breaking the swarm's cohesion. Every move was calculated yet unpredictable, blending chaos and strategy seamlessly. Sirian's own fleet moved beside them, weaving through the gaps. Their fire was no longer neat or ceremonial. It was sudden, scattered, and deadly. Velari gunners learned to trade, to sacrifice one ship to save many, to create openings that the humans exploited with lethal efficiency. One Terran destroyer rammed a swarm carrier, not once but twice tearing the massive drone apart. Sirian whispered almost reverently, "They are everywhere at once, impossible to pin down." Velari Rise, the Velari fleet, once trembling at the sight of drones, now moved like a living organism. Officers shouted orders quickly, adapting to the humans' movements. Ships that would have panicked now held their ground, turning desperation into advantage. Sirian himself directed several squadrons, using the tactics the humans had drilled into them. "Flank left. Push forward. Trade, don't retreat." His commands carried the weight of authority, but also the fire of survival. One of his young captains, who had once frozen at the thought of sacrifice, now led a daring maneuver. Her frigate darted through the swarm, drawing fire away from the radiant crest, and then looped around to destroy two enemy carriers. She smiled faintly, feeling the thrill of control where once there had been fear. The humans noticed every move. Commander Hale, monitoring the Velari's performance, spoke into the channel. "Good. You move like hunters now. Keep it tight. Keep it alive." The Velari were no longer students. They were students becoming warriors. The tide turns for hours. The void was filled with light and fire. The swarm adapted, humans adapted, Velari adapted. The battle was a storm of steel and energy, relentless and unyielding. Every time a machine destroyed a Velari ship, two more of the swarm were cut down. Every time humans lost a vessel, they pressed forward, trading loss for gain with brutal efficiency. And then, at a crucial moment, Captain Reyes gave the signal. "All units, converge. Strike hard. Focus fire on the swarm command cores." Velari sensors detected clusters of massive drones larger than any they had seen, coordinating attacks. These were the core units, the ones controlling the swarm. The humans had studied them carefully, and now they struck. Missiles streaked through space, beams of energy tore into the cores, and human and Volari ships executed coordinated ramming attacks. The cores exploded in brilliant white fire, sending shockwaves through the enemy formation. Thousands of drones were destroyed instantly, and the rest faltered, confused without their command signals. Sirian's claws trembled. He could hardly believe what he saw. The swarm, the endless nightmare that had terrified their species, was breaking. A lesson in humanity. After the final swarm core fell, the remaining machines scattered and retreated into the void. Silence filled the system once more. The Volari fleet, battered but alive, hovered in awe of the humans around them. Sirian spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion. They fought like the galaxy has never seen, like death itself had no meaning to them. Captain Reyes responded simply, calm as ever. This is not just fighting. This is survival. We do not fight for glory. We fight to endure. You have learned, Volari. You are no longer prey. The Volari officers whispered among themselves. They had seen what humans could do. They had trained with them, fought beside them, and now they understood. Humanity did not just survive, they overcame. They thrived where others would have fallen. The Galaxy Watch's news of the battle spread faster than the survivors could have imagined. Across nearby systems, other species received fragments of reports, sensors detecting Terran and Volari fleets moving in ways that defied expectation. Rumors spread. A fleet of humans had destroyed tens of thousands of machines in a single engagement. Some species reacted in awe, others in fear. Whispers traveled through galactic hubs and communication networks. The Deathworlders. They answered the SOS. And the galaxy will never be the same. Even the Volari, who had witnessed the power firsthand, were humbled. They had survived, yes. But they had also been shown the truth of what humanity could bring. They realized that when humans entered a system, the very rules of war, survival, and strategy changed. They fought not with rules, but with instincts honed on a planet that had never been forgiving. Sirian looked at his officers. We were saved, but we were also shown a way to survive as we never have before. That is the gift of the Deathworlders. A new beginning. For the first time in generations, the Volari dared to dream beyond immediate survival. Their fleets would be rebuilt. Their colonies could thrive. And this time, they would do so knowing that humanity was not just a force to call upon in desperation. They were a guide, a partner, a teacher of what it truly meant to endure. Captain Reyes turned to Sirian one last time before leaving the system. Remember this, Admiral. Survival is never simple. You adapt, you learn, you endure. And when the galaxy thinks you are broken, you fight back. Not just for yourself, but for all who depend on you. The humans departed as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind no fanfare, only the echo of their power and the lessons they had imparted. And the Volari knew the truth. The galaxy had taken notice. From distant systems to uncharted sectors, every species that heard the story would understand one thing clearly. When humans arrive, survival follows. And sometimes so does a force the universe has never truly faced before. For the Volari, for humanity, and for every civilization watching from the stars, the message was clear. The galaxy had entered a new age, an age where the Deathworlders were no longer myth, they were reality, and the universe would never forget it.